I like to think of the casual as the segue between designer and street.
Mm-hmm.
Putting these two things together, noticing that there is a way for us to coexist.
So, walking us from the beginning, can you introduce yourself and how you ended up from LA to Japan?
My name is Reggie, known as Reggie Casual. I'm from Los Angeles, California originally. I'm a military kid. My father was in the Navy, so I traveled quite a bit as a kid. I've lived in Atlanta, I've lived in Illinois, and of course I've lived overseas here in Japan. And I just became enamored with the culture. I mean, it's pretty much my speed. As far as how Japanese approach design or just life in general. So it was really easy for me to become acclimated with Japanese, culture and lifestyle. But one of the things that I definitely had to do was embrace the fact that I was a foreigner in Japan. One of the few things that, if I can give anybody some advice, if they're ever coming to Japan, whether they understand the language or not, I speak and read the language, but whether you do that or not, as long as you are a foreigner that is a clear foreigner, you're still going to be treated like that. So you have to either accept it. There's a few levels, leave, or you accept it and take advantage of it. And so that's what I did. I took advantage of the fact that I knew English, Japanese, and I was a clear foreigner in Japan. And I used that as a way to introduce Japanese culture via fashion.
I guess we might as well just get into that then. How did you become an expert?
I'm still, I wouldn't say the neophyte phase of Western fashion. I'm pretty adept at fashion in general. I actually got involved in fashion when I was doing dance. Most people don't know is that I'm actually a trained dancer. Early in my years, I wanted to do entertainment. I wanted to do singing and songwriting. What I found out more about myself is that I was really involved in just the creative arts. And then when it came to fashion, it was just a natural fit for me. Growing up, I always thought that there was just too many cool things in life and I wanted to do all of them. Fashion became one of those things that I could control as I got older. Those other things like music, dance, and everything, if you're going to make careers off of them, takes a lot out of you as you get older. I realized that fashion I could do for the rest of my life. And I wouldn't get weary. My body wouldn't my body wouldn't get all creaky and old. So I just made a decision based on, the future and just making calculated decisions based on that.
Did you happen to read editorials when you were growing up? I personally was a huge fan of fruits. And I got to visit Japan for the first time in November. And it was really cool. I got to see the entire collection. So I was just like, I couldn't believe it.
Ali Popeye, Men's No, these are all mags that I was pretty much into once I got more acclimated into Japanese fashion. In fact, you almost have to know what Japanese style was. One of the more hidden secrets about me, I had no idea about Japanese fashion, like intensely outside of what was presented to me in the West before I came here for that reason. Right? Even when I came here the first time, or I should say the second time, I knew about labels like Babe. I knew about labels, like Undercover, and Neighborhood. I knew of these labels, but I wasn't studied in them because I was more into music and dance at that time. And so it took me like a year to know who the designers were. And once the rabbit hole was dug, I got into everything. I mean, I got into Western designers like Helmut Lang and Haider Ackermann. And then I got into Japanese designers like Rei Kawakubo, Junya Watanabe, and Jun Takahashi. Beyond like the Shinsuke Takizawas, who was in Neighborhood, and of course Nigo with Babe. I just started learning more and more about them. That's the great thing about Japan, is that the older generation is still quite influential in Japanese fashion. Rei Kawakubo, you can't walk in Japan without knowing Comme des Garçons and Rei Kawakubo and what she's done. When you think about Rei Kawakubo, she's the one who kind of like spearheaded this entire generation of punk, anti-fashion, this movement. She's the one who brought it into the fold and gave confidence to a lot of young Japanese designers. Namely Chitose Abe and Junya Watanabe, these people, Chitose Abe is of Sakai. And so this entire ecosystem of fashion in Japan is one that you have to respect these older designers, and therefore they're still quite relevant. But you have newer designers out there. Yoshio Kubo, one of my favorite designers right now. You have new people like Birdie, who's with Girls Don't Cry. I mean, it's an ecosystem that I've been trying to infiltrate myself for quite a long time. And, it's just, I'm just lucky to be in just a whisper in their ear that they know.
Is it thanks to the casual or other things?
Oh, absolutely. I've been quite lucky in the sense that I have a pretty good team. I have some people who have my best interests, and I'm a pretty good presenter, being that I was, from California and being around film, being around people who do this stuff for a living. It just came natural. My father is a really good public speaker, so it was really easy for me to kind of inherited that. My mother was really good at linguistics, so it was really easy for me to catch on to Japanese quite fast. I guess the casual manifested everything that I ever wanted to do, whether it was music, fashion, and design. I get to do all those things now, which is, it's just, at this point, it's a blessing and a curse, but I like to look at it as more of a blessing than the curse.
Yeah, what's the curse part, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, the curse is that once you've committed to the style of content that I'm trying to do, you have to continue that style, right? You have to maintain that level of quality and consistency. You have to commit. And as an artist, every artist knows, being able to commit, especially to finishing, is the hardest thing in the world. Because now you're under deadlines. It's not you that you have to worry about, it's everybody else that relies on you to put that stuff out, which is why you see a lot of individuals in the arts, they just end up quitting because they're just like, man, I can't do it anymore. Expectation is so high. And I've dealt with that a couple of times. It's like, man, I can't do this anymore, especially when you have something like YouTube and you're constantly looking at other people who are in your field that you're cool with, you're fine with, you have no problem with, but you see them, maybe some of them reaching a far higher success than you at a faster rate, and you're like, what am I doing wrong? My team constantly has to remind me, dude, you're almost at 200,000 subscribers. That's freaking good, bro. It's often difficult because of your expectation of yourself and where you want to be. And so I guess that's the curse, and worrying about that all the time, it's quite stressful. But on the other hand, you meet so many fantastic people, and you get involved in so many different things. There was a point in my life where I was just the most confident individual in the world. Just I knew that was gonna happen. I'm Reggie Casual, what else? But until they started happening, I was like, holy crap, I didn't really think they were gonna start happening to me.
I can relate. Right? I can absolutely relate to that with the magazine. What's your life looking like now with COVID-19?
Not much different. Japan is doing pretty well in regards to what's happening with the pandemic. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on what Japan could do better, but what I will say is there is a sense of community in Japan. We have this phrase in Japanese, it's wareware nihonjin. Wareware nihonjin means we are Japanese. So at the end of the day, that prevails over everything. So whatever is good for the community, I'm willing to sacrifice that thing. Wareware nihonjin also has a negative connotation, like saying that we are Japanese and you aren't. But the simple fact is that because they have this overarching kind of mantra, we are Japanese, what one individual thinks does not prevail over the entire culture. And so what I try to convey to my Western compatriots over there, my friends and family over there in America, I say, one of the things that I hope one day that Americans realize is beyond, culture, color, creed, religion. A problem of one American is the problem of all Americans. I remember one time, just short, I asked a Japanese lady, what do you think I am? A lot of the time, Japanese have a hard time differentiating people who are brown, black, and, whatever, what have you, especially because their notion of black people is usually the darker, much darker black people. And so I'm coming with the, kind of that caramel kind of light with the freckles. People call me Pakistani. Some people think I was from Nepal or India, and I'm just like, nah, I'm a black dude from America, right? And so she looks at me for like 5 seconds and says, American. And I'm just like, yeah, right? Like I'm thinking she's gonna say something else, but to them, the idea of seeing somebody as their color is almost oblivious to them because they all are the same. It's like, well, obviously you're a darker skinned person, so that's not what you're asking me. Mm-hmm. What you're asking me is where you're from. Mm-hmm. And that kind of dynamic changed my perspective on what being an American is. It's more of a culture. Yes. And what we exude as a culture. Because if I were to bring a white person from America and a black person from America and I set them in Japan, they have more in common with each other than any Japanese person. Mm-hmm. They have more in common with each other than any Nigerian that they might see. But the problem with America is that if a white person sees a Nigerian and a black person from America, they kind of equate them in the same box, right? And so that's what I'm trying to convey through fashion, actually. What is the difference between Japanese and a Western style or American style? Because there is a cultural difference. And in order for us to accept culture, we have to be beyond our personal feelings towards any one given like ethnicity or society. Not to say that that's not important, but it's to be beyond that. I think one day we'll get there, but right now we're still learning. So that's how life is.
I'm not confident that we'll get there in the States, like here in the US, but I do feel like in other countries, maybe people might start thinking in that way. But here,
I think so. I think that's the idea. If I were a part of this movement that was, about expanding the purview of the idea of what it means to be a black person, especially in my case. In my case, there's a lot of mixture going on. Like my family's like going to the United Nations. Like you wouldn't know who is who. You'd be like, okay, so you are, right? And so you'd have to ask people like, what are you or what not? In my case, it's relatively easy to see. But I think that that's the idea. That if I were in the movement, I'd be like, it's the idea of how you're perceived outside of America. There is this idea of a white person, or this idea of a black person, or of an Asian person, or of a Latino person. But you and I both know that none of these are monolithic, right? So I know black people that are quote unquote act like white people, but I would never say that because I know, they just grew up in this kind of society. Yes. Such as myself. Like I grew up in a military family in pretty much affluent neighborhoods my entire life. So the way that I speak, the way that I operate is not of a white person. Mm-hmm. It's of a person who lived in that kind of society, in that culture. Mm-hmm. So when I tell people, growing up, my family was incredibly conservative. You wouldn't even imagine what I used to watch, what I used to be involved in, and the reason why I think the way that I do. But I believe you need individuals who are like me, who have come into the fold, I'm a little bit more, I'd say a little bit more open-minded than my father, way more open-minded than my father, right? Because I look at the problems and I say, hey, that's a problem. Let's fix that problem. Rather than just staying in my corner and being stubborn. I'm incredibly flexible with my ideas and people's opinions. When you end the conversation beforehand, then we can't have a dialogue. And that's why I think you say like, I don't feel confident about it because we are naturally like that. As far as the difference, I guess that's the overall idea outside of COVID-19, how life in Japan has always been is just this idea beyond, how one individual thinks. Let's do what's good for the society at large. That comes with its own detriments, of course, but in this instance, we're doing okay.
Is there anything that you miss about the past? It can just be anything that was just like, I do miss that. Like, I wouldn't change that.
I definitely miss the idea of personal creation. I feel like it's coming back in a different form, and that's encouraging. And I'm all for evolution, but let's take it in terms of fashion.
Okay.
In the 2010s, what we saw was exponential growth of followership. Beyond social media, it kind of manifested itself in real time as well. This idea that we were following others, right? We were following trends. We were following what the famous people were wearing. And this is a result of people becoming more affluent, right? People were getting more money. People were making more money. And when you make more money, you lose that creative aspect, because now you're looking for other people to give you a sense of style or a sense of, what's hot, what's not. Whereas when people weren't as wealthy, they were creating abundantly. Because they had to make do with what they had. And I'm not saying I want people to be poor again, even though there's a big gap between who's wealthy and who's not.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I want people to be poor again. What I would love is for people to take a different form that I see manifesting now, which is bespoke kind of styles, right? Like, I'm going to create something that's by hand, right? And I'm going to show it to my group of friends, and they'll probably love it because my group of friends are a lot like me. And you see that on a smaller scale. You see that with more of the art directed individuals, those who are following the art. And sometimes they're not so good at business, but they have such a fantastic view on product. It blows all the business out of the water. So that's encouraging to see, but we're still in that mode of, where can I get that? Right? Somebody sees me wearing something, hey man, ID on that. Hey, tell me where that is. And I am just the guy that's like, search, man, just search, search for it. It's like you said, you used to read Fruits magazine, or you probably still do, like look at it from now and then for that kind of inspiration. That's what I'm saying. Like, go out there, see be inspired by it. You don't need the idea of what I'm wearing. What you need is to find something that's similar to what I have and apply it to what you do. Because I don't want anybody dressing like me. I always told everybody, it's like, if I ever start a label, if I ever start a fashion collection, I would never want anybody to be head to toe in my label. I would like to produce something that you could wear head to toe, because, it's not logo-fied and, branded and stuff like that. But my goal is not to have you wear everything that I make. My goal is for you to be drawn by what I make and come to your own conclusions, but also use it to apply to your own sense of style. This is what I've learned in fashion for a long time, and this is what I think is missing. And I'm anxious to see that again. I really would love the past to manifest itself in that way. There's so much more to indulge in. There's so much access to everything. This is why I cover Japanese fashion. I don't hate on any brand that's doing well, like Supreme, Palace, all these big brands out, Noah, whatever. Do your thing, like the brands, but there's so much more than those brands. And there's so much more for you to partake in. It's a lot easier when you don't have to worry about how you think other people are going to perceive you, or, and receive you. So.
Yeah.
I miss that. Just having fun, right? Everything's so stressful now. Like, have some fun with it, Whoever you meet today is not going to remember what you wore today. So do whatever you want. It's people aren't paying that much attention.
Not at all. So since you started talking about mistakes, what mistakes have you learned to not repeat?
There's so many.
Well, just pick one.
There's so many. I would say overspending on things that you don't necessarily need. The reason, and this goes into fashion, this goes into business, this goes into everything. If I were to start everything over again, starting a channel, YouTube, I would have probably not bought half the cameras and lenses that I bought. If I were more adept at knowing which designers that really moved me at the beginning, I would have invested more of my time and money into their designs rather than going from designer to designer, from style to style. I'm more of a consistent style type of person. You go on my Instagram, you go on anything, I have a consistent kind of style that permeates through all of my outfits. And the only reason why I've done that is because I want to be as perfect as possible in that style that I'm creating for myself. And then expand with things that I am influenced by. Because if you try to do every single style, say you like one style more than the other, but you still like that other style, you're going to be spending money all over the place. It's going to be haphazard, in my opinion. It's just going to be like, oh man, I like this guy, I like this guy, I like this guy. You know, what I started to do is I invested in pieces that I felt were going to contribute to my style. Recently, I've been like, you know, I should put some color, but how can I put in color without, you know, going against what I normally do? I feel comfortable doing this, but I do want to be, you know, I do want to, you know, show a little pizzazz here and there. One of the few patterns that I really enjoy is floral patterns. I love floral patterns for absolutely, I don't know why I like flowers. Maybe it's because it's something with science. So I recently just bought this white shirt with kind of like blue floral patterns, and it fits my style because it's a little bit longer, it drapes a little bit more. I wish I was that adept at the beginning, because it would have been easier for me to invest in pieces that I truly wanted. Because now my closet is full of pieces that I truly want. I feel like I don't even need to shop anymore. Like now I can spend $700, $800 on a designer piece because it might be the only piece that I get. Like I just saw Issey Miyake's collection, and he has this nice floral, like hooded, sheer pleated kind of like overcoat. And I'm like, I'm getting that. I don't care how much it costs, I'm getting it, right? And now I can say that because I have enough pieces in my closet not to get the entire fit, but just to get that piece.
Do you dress up for the streets, or like do you go anywhere? Like who sees your outfits?
That's the crazy thing. This is another reason why I don't spend as much anymore. I don't go out as much as I used to. You know what? I'm gonna be real with you. The reason why I buy a lot of these clothes is so I can get reference for when I start building my own stuff, right? So half of the stuff that I buy is just like, I need to see it in my hands, and I need to see what I would look like in it, and if it works, right? So most of the time I'm buying things that are giving me a reference point for my future designs. Maybe I should wear a wider shirt and layer it with a longer tank, and that gives me more length and also shows my torso. I'm trying to solve problems.
I can relate with magazines. That's the only reason I collect them, really. I mean, I enjoy it, but it's also research and like figuring out how to make it better with what I do.
Right, that's it.
Do you have any favorite movies, throwback movies?
Ooh, Back to the Future. I love Back to the Future. Okay. I love Back to the Future. I think that's where my love of just fashion actually started. You have Marty McFly in his I forgot which Nikes those were, but then he also had the mags in Back to the Future Part 2. Then he had that inflatable vest like that. I love future kind of movies. I love movies that go into like the future or anything like that. Like I like space movies. I like astronomy and astrophysics. I can listen to it all day, even though I don't understand like 70% of it, right? So I love learning about the universe around me.
Would you ever do like a movie review for your channel?
I would not do a movie review at this moment.
Yes.
Maybe I would do something where I review the styles in the movie. That was something that we actually had planned on doing for any particular movie to kind of like expand the purview of what the casual is. They need reviews in that sense, and I don't think anybody else is doing that right now.
I mean, the casual will be the perfect place to see this. Absolutely. So,
right.
No rush, but I'm looking forward to it if it ever.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is something that we want to do. And as we grow, it's a little further down, but I don't plan on doing this forever as like the host solely. What I really want is I want this to be more of a community network. And so I would love to have individuals like yourself to be on the channel to talk about these kind of things. I like to think of the casual as the segue between designer and street, putting these two things together, noticing that there is a way for us to coexist. We could talk sneakers, but we could also talk Dior. We could talk Supreme, but we can also talk Nicholas Daly. Right? We could talk this person, but we can also talk Rei Kawakubo. like where you can learn about designer fashion.
It's even better though. So yeah.
I like to,
yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Since you started talking about your parents, are your parents proud of you?
I have a complicated relationship with my parents, particularly my father. You don't have to be sorry about this. My mother has passed away, and she was always supportive of me. Like she was the one who kind of taught me, Reggie, you can do whatever you want to do. She told me one time, I was really depressed at one point. When I came back to California for my first stint in Japan, living in Japan, went back to California, and I was just incredibly depressed. And I called her up and I was like, Mom, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's going on. And she literally says, what's your name? She's like, what's your full name? I was like, my name is Reginald. And she said, do you know what your name means? And I was like, yeah, I know what my name means. It comes from the word regal, which means king, which means, she's like, yeah, you're a king, so act like one. She would always remind me of the accomplishments that I have, even just based on something simple as my name. Look at what you've done. She would always have to remind me, you lived in Japan, you started your own business, you did this, what are you talking about? Like, people would love to be you. You're doing things that people in their wildest dreams wouldn't have been able to do. All you have to do is be comfortable with yourself. That's the problem. You're not comfortable with yourself because you want more. But if you realize that you already have a lot, and the only thing that you need to do is to take care of that, to protect that. And as you get older, you'll expand on it. No problem. You'll be fine because you're smart. I try to tell that to my baby brother all the time. It's like, yeah, man, you're fine. You're young, you're spry, you're just getting started. So kill it. My father, on the other hand, he's a military guy and he's also a Trump guy. So like we have very different views on how the world works. And he's not one of those like Republican Trump guys. He's one of those like, I love Trump guys. So like for me and him, it's just like, okay, I can't really talk to you, man. Like we can't talk because of how you view the world. And he'll say, well, are you a Democrat? Are you liberal? I'm like, Dad, I don't trust anybody. The only person that I can trust is myself. But the only thing that I tend to do is, I tell him all the time, the only thing that I ever want is to live a life on my own terms. That's it. I don't want anybody to feel like they have control over my life. Of course, I care about, the general consensus of people, but I can't sit here and keep on trying to convince people when there's a large contingent of other people who are trying to not convince them or to convince them otherwise. And so my relationship with my father based on that has always been incredibly complicated. So that's where I stand with my parents. I love my parents, but I will definitely say my favorite of my parents was my mother. And I miss her, but she gave me enough.
What is your greatest superpower today?
The ability to observe. It's something that I got from my father. I just notice things. It's what got me here. It's one of the things that I've been happy to receive from both of my parents. It's one of the talents that I do understand. This talent of mine is the one thing that I know I can do. I used to do these tours here in Japan, and I used to have like 4 or 5 people with me, and I would just absorb what they were doing, like what their outfits. And then at the end, I would tell them what kind of person they were based on their outfit. Because I like to think that I'm very observant with myself. That's like the key to this, is like knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. One of the things that I constantly get myself on is, even though I'm incredibly observant, I can be incredibly unfocused, right? I tend to, whenever I get involved in one thing, like I'll tend to brush everything off and then go to that one thing and then stick with that. And then I'll go down this rabbit hole that gets me further and further from the goal that I initially wanted to start doing. I tend to follow the rabbit hole and keep going and realize after hours, man, I should have been doing this. I may gain a lot of knowledge in the long run, but finishing the task at hand is often the biggest issue that I have. And also, I'm conflict averse in almost every situation. If I get too frustrated, especially in debate, I'll just be like, okay, fine. Because I'm just like, I don't want to deal with it anymore. Right. And nobody that's really close to me likes this. They hate this because I will just be like, all right, cool. And I'll just clock out. Right. Because and they're just like, no, explain it. So I don't want to get into it. I'm done. And it bothers a lot of people, but I don't think there's enough time in anybody's lifetime to deal with conflict that they don't need to deal with.
Yes.
So I try to avoid conflict in all situations. It's just, I like to be happy, and
yes.
And, conflict usually ends with people wanting to be right.
Favorite city? It's okay if you don't have anything.
I would have to say Tokyo. Los Angeles is great. I love Los Angeles, but Los Angeles, one, it's home, but two, there's a part of Los Angeles that LA's just not my speed. Right. And what I mean by that is that it's the glamour side of LA. I don't get into that. Like,
I heard that's just implant kind of thing. I heard.
Yeah, that it really is, but they're everywhere.
Okay.
Right. So it's hard to get away from that, especially when you work in an industry such as mine. That vapidness of just creating something based off of what's in front of you rather than creating a legacy really got to me. Because that's all I've ever wanted to do. I've always been about, let's create a legacy brand, right? Let's create a legacy business, because that's gonna be much more influential in people's lives. I would love to be in that position, to not just, a position of power, but a position of influence, right? To give people insight and to give people hope. But we live in a time where the influences permeate throughout society, and we have an educational gap that's lowering every single year. And that is a detriment to all of our societies. And I think too many people are just saying, F it, I'm just gonna do this thing and it doesn't matter. And they all think that they're going to be successful doing that.
Yeah.
And I'll be the first person to tell you that that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Right. Some of you guys are not going to be successful, and some of you are. And that's not to say you couldn't, but not everybody has to take the same path. I hope we get to a point where it all works out, where education prevails. Because of that, Tokyo has always been my favorite city, because people take pride in the knowledge. That knowledge, and like I said at the onset, Tokyo has always been my speed, because people care about knowing stuff. It's not enough to just design fashion. You have to know fashion. You have to know the designers. Whenever I talk to Japanese about fashion and style, and I tell them about Japanese design, I'll give like an expose to like maybe guests and stuff that I toured around. All the Japanese people say, he's right. That's exactly how Japanese perceive fashion. We don't care about making so much money. What we care about is getting our idea across and creating the communities, these small communities. Because in Japanese fashion, the diversity doesn't come from us as individuals. We're all Japanese, right? But our diversity comes in with the choices that we make in our lives. For anybody to notice that on the outside really means that they respect Japanese culture and they understand what we're trying to do. This is why you don't see a lot of Japanese brands going out west. They're not trying to compete like that. What they're trying to do is get their idea across, right? And they don't want to compete with American brands that are just like pop, selling everywhere. They just want to let's just get our idea across. We got our fans. We're cool with this amount. We're cool with, maintaining. One of the things that what we do in America is we worry about growth and profit, right?
Yeah.
In Japanese, growth and profit. You got to grow, you got to make more profit every year, right? In Japan, it's like we need to get to a point where we have steady profit, which means that we're able to pay everybody. We're able to maintain our status as a legacy brand. We don't need to sell that much more. We need to keep everybody that likes our brand within our umbrella, while at the same time expanding their purview, which means that we might get other people to come in, which might expand our business, but we're not trying to grow in the sense of hyper expansion. That's not the idea. The idea is to maintain a semblance of community, and consistency. That's the one thing that prevails in Japanese business, consistency. And that's why Yoji Yamamoto hasn't changed in 50 years, right? That's why Beams maintains, because consistency rather than hyper growth. And so that's that life, the life that I've come into in Japan, in Tokyo. It's hard to give up. It really is hard to give up.
I can only imagine. I want that for myself eventually.
It's incredibly hard to give up.
Yeah.
I love it, but there are some things, but I love it.
I guess that's where we'll end it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You have a good one.
Thank you. Bye. Let's see if I stop the video. Okay, bye.
All right, see you.